Welcome everybody, this is Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors.
And this is Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors Group.
We'd like to welcome you to our K-12 Politics and Tech video series.
Our objective is to give you the absolute latest of what's going on in Sacramento that affects public school districts, obviously, and as well as all the technology stuff that's going on that's so vital to delivering for kids these days.
And remember, if you find these videos useful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share out over social media. You're our marketing team. We appreciate your support, and let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody, Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors, back with another episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. As always, Kevin Gordon, co-host of the show here, President of Capital Advisors, excuse me. Kevin, glad to have you here.
Yeah, great to be with you, Tim.
Yeah, and let's start in DC. There's been a lot of news about potential stimulus. It seems like there's a lot of debate going on back there. Here in Wall Street's up because of potential stimulus, but then there seems to be some political gridlock. So can you share, as far as you see it, what's going on back there with Biden's stimulus proposal?
Yeah, I think everything's going as planned because negotiation. They've used this process. Most people have heard of it now, the reconciliation process, which really puts all of the power in the hands of the Democrats and the president. So that means there will be a $1.9 trillion package. It's just a matter of going to be, expect the Senate to need $1 billion that will come to education. 130 of it will go to K-12. It's actually a little bit higher than that because there are other different components to it, but 130 billion of it we do know is going to be K-12. And you're going to like the fact that I saw there's that $7 billion tucked in there that's on technology. So anyway, in terms of that, we need as much of that early as we can get it. And the dollar amounts per LEA are going to look like for the December package. Now that was supposed to be due sometime this week. We haven't seen it yet, but look for those numbers. That's on the December package. And then obviously we'll be waiting to see what happens with the rest of this that's going to come out of the Biden administration. But all good news. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the reopening debate in Sacramento after you cover a few issues. But there's a little federal component you got to remind me to talk about that's in state lawmakers are talking about too.
We'll do that, Kevin. Thanks for the update, challenge to get that organized. So looking forward to keeping up on the additional stimulus, and perhaps we'll have Governor Wise on to help us as we get a little close. So staying in Washington, the FCC, if you remember, in the last stimulus, speaking of, there was $3.2 billion that was earmarked for subs, and that was basically going to be $50 for anyone who needed the assistance, $50 a month towards your internet plan, $75 a month if you're on tribal lands. Well, the FCC, it seems, might apply for it, how they're even going to advertise for it. So it seems like we're a little ways off from that, and it's a little disappointing. It seems like a head scratcher that we haven't seen something significant come from the FCC. So it's lurking, but just like you said, Kevin, they're trying to allocate to schools. The FCC is trying to figure out how to allocate. Even though they have the dollars, they need the mechanism in place about how people are going to apply. A couple of other interesting stories. Internet usage has surged, obviously due to the pandemic. And let's just say an act that does not seem like the greatest timing. Comcast has announced it's going to implement data caps for all accounts within the year of 2021. So, these service providers could be a little bit more helpful in these times. It does seem like kind of a rough thing to do to folks, especially with the fact that we are using the internet apps. Seem like bad timing at the very least. So with that, Kevin, you mentioned getting back into reopening, which has been the hot topic lately. Can you just tell us what the latest is in Sacramento?
In front of superintendents across the state, AXA, as well as the county superintendents, I think very candid, good presentations where, the feedback that he got was whatever you do, don't make things worse than they already are for reopening. If it's a reopening plan that he wants to try to push, then let's make sure it doesn't end up being a plan for closing. In other words, make sure you allow anybody that's managed to get open to stay open, or those that were nearly open, they were on their way to being open, don't suddenly get saddled with a bunch of. As part of the debate, the governor had said, and this is kind of the cornerstone of all of the back and forth that's been going on literally for the last couple of weeks, has been about vaccines. And the governor said, look, if we are open this spring, it's not going to happen. And we totally agree with him. So basically what he said is that he strongly believes, as many folks believe, across the education community, certainly on the management side, anybody in the K-12 community that doesn't want education, and when we say education, all of the education family that works in districts, to be a top priority for vaccination. But that's different that everybody's debating in the opening package, a comprehensive redo of his package that has to be redone because February to apply by. This thing has some characteristics that we know are going to occur, but amongst them that has to get settled is that. So the little political stuff that's been going on since then is that a heavy amount of lobbying by our superintendents across the state and principals, people on the management side, school boards have been doing a great job of reinforcing this message about make sure you don't load up too much on the testing cadence, make sure we don't have a prerequisite that everybody's got to get vaccinated or we won't be able to reopen. Make sure you grandfather in everybody that's managed to get open. Make sure you minimize the number of hoops generally that you're making people jump through in order to get this done, because we've had guidance that works. One of the examples is 6 foot versus 4 feet. And, we don't need the tape measure police running around. When we got kids we're dealing with, people are not going to always follow the rules, but you can do the best that you can to try to keep a safe environment. But there are also rules that schools already have to comply with, and they need to. There's Cal OSHA requirements and all kinds of other things. So reopening safely is not something that I think anybody is quarreling about. It's what does the definition of reopening safely mean? Everybody's committed to it, but there are different definitions of what it actually means.
Well, thanks for the update there. Lots of sounds like sticky issues to work through, but again, it feels like we're getting close to when there's this much debate, feels like we're getting close to some traction and hopefully some version of reopening that everybody can agree upon. So appreciate that. Wanted to ask you about the McCarty announcement that came out this week. Can you share a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, and so Kevin McCarty, who's the chairman of the Assembly Budget Subcommittee and is one of those that's involved with all the negotiations over what a package is going to look like, did kind of an announcement that kind of surprised us a little bit, because we were waiting for that 3-part, announcement, which would be the governor, the assembly, and the Senate. And what Kevin basically said is, look, the legislature is ready to move on something, put something, actually, he said, in print. And the couple of dynamics that he talked about are not different than stuff that I've sent out to our clients earlier about what we were hearing out of the Capitol, which is that we're working on an April timeframe now in terms of targeting some kind of opening. What McCarty says is in their package would be actually a mandate that you have to reopen once you get into red and the case counts are safe. But then, of course, there was all these protocols that you would have to have on top of it, which they didn't talk so much about what that was about. But he did talk about financial elements, which is not a surprise because they really mirror numbers we've already seen. $2 billion for the incentive grant. That may go out differently than we might have thought before, because it sounds like they may be doing a distribution to all districts. It's not completely settled yet. And then what would happen is that any district that didn't reopen would lose their share of that money. So districts have sort of this backward way of opting out. Then there's the $4.6 billion, which we've always talked about since the governor introduced it in his own budget, which is focused on learning loss, primarily on extended learning and interventions. So that's kind of untouched, at least it sounds like in his package. But the new dimension that ties back to my federal sort of conversation a little bit earlier is a $6 billion piece that would come from the feds. Now, the thing that's going to be interesting to figure out what McCarty is talking about on that piece is, does that have anything to do with, the $6.7 billion of money that's coming to California out of the December action by Congress and President Trump? Or are they thinking that comes out of future dollars that would come out of the Biden plan? It's not really clear. And the reason why it's important is because the money that we got in December is very, very sort of strongly earmarked already. The state really can't mess with that money. The overwhelming majority of it goes to school districts, and it goes through Title I formula. And of course, it's outlined already what all the purposes are. So it's hard for the state to come in over the top of that and say, we want you to use it for anything they might prescribe, because they're really not allowed to do that. So I'm not sure how this works out. I suspect what it means is that they're talking about $6 billion in assistance that would come out of the Biden plan, but it's still not completely clear yet. But McCarty did make an announcement. There was a lot of details missing. There was no sort of illumination about what they want to require regarding collective bargaining. There was nothing relative to testing cadence mentioned by him. So still a lot of unanswered questions.
Well, thanks, Kevin, and yeah, I guess we'll look for more on this as things start to clear up. But really appreciate the update there. As far as advocacy, we were talking a little bit before the show about advocacy. Can you tell us the news there this week?
Yeah, and it was the advocacy by on the management side that drove, I think, kind of woke up everybody. Oh my gosh, the superintendents, principals, and administrators, and school board members, people on the management side that did one of these sort of occasional blitzes on advocacy that we only see maybe once or twice a year in any given year. You guys really delivered this year in terms of advocacy. And what it did is it kind of smoked out the fact that others wanted to be heard on this issue, particularly our friends in labor. They had a letter earlier on that kind of prompted some of our advocacy that laid out a bunch of demands that we knew that if it was accommodated, you would essentially not be reopening, because we can't accommodate all those things. Well, they've kind of come back and done some advocacy of their own, and we've seen it manifest itself in one of the sub bullets I have today. Talks about this major ad buy that they did statewide. That's got to be a few $1 million, if not more, on TV all up and down the state, paid for by organized labor in the education community, to basically underscore that there still is a danger with COVID, and that if we're going to reopen, we need to reopen safely. The ad itself is not a bad ad. I mean, the message isn't bad. The message does not say that we cannot open until everybody gets vaccinated. It says that teachers should be a priority, and I don't think anyone in the ed community disagrees with it. But I think the effect of the ad is really to try to counter the lobbying that we've done to say, be careful of all the things you load up on. And it's really to say, we really do need to have all of these safeguards that, in our view, could be a little bit excessive, so excessive you can't open. So there's a balance in there somewhere, but there is this sort of PR war that's going on behind the scenes, and even carried on to the federal level. You'll notice that there's been all kinds of press attention about what does Biden mean and what doesn't he mean regarding vaccines. And reporters have been trying to nail them down. And then finally yesterday, the White House said, when asked very pointedly, do you mean that vaccines are going to have to be a requirement before schools reopen? And the White House emphatically said, no, we do not mean that. We think teachers should be a high priority, of the highest priority, but we don't mean that. So really interesting dynamics playing out here. And the governor did mention in his press conference very early this week how frustrated he was with the very, very difficult negotiations that are going on, because they haven't resolved this yet.
Well, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, tricky stuff to navigate. And speaking of reopening, if anybody's been watching this show since the very beginning, one of the first issues we discussed was the College Board. They basically own all the AP testing, and AP language was particularly difficult last year without students in school, because basically, like, you're trying to use video recording yourself while you're taking the test, and that's hard to administer remotely. They've come out this year and basically just said flat out they're not going to offer that remotely, and the students are going to have to come on site to take those tests. Now, that seems kind of harsh in this environment because, as you just mentioned, there's so many sticky points about getting students back in school, and there are some districts that have flat out said we're not coming back this year, even though they're being urged to, as you mentioned as well. But there's a lot to navigate. And then here's students that need to take this test to get into the colleges that they want to go to. And if the schools can't have them on site, we have a big problem. So it is a sticky point. It is unfortunate. They've had a year to tackle the problems that they couldn't really tackle last year, and they were under a lot of fire for. And instead of actually delivering, they've forced everyone to have students go on site to take those. So a little bit frustrating, But just know that that is an announcement they made recently, and you'll have to try to come up with some sort of workaround to have kids take those tests if that's something that's important to you. Another announcement this week is Google has updated their education suite. And if you remember, a lot of the tools that we've been using were not built for in-home instruction. Google Meet, for example, was built for companies to communicate with each other, but not for a teacher to teach a classroom, muting everybody at once and sharing their screen and capturing their screen and these sorts of things. So Google, 11 months into the pandemic, these things take time. They've updated a lot of their education suite to address distance learning, and you're starting to see other companies do the same. So again, we talk about this sometimes. Every now and then when you get a chance to sort of come up for air, it's time to look around the marketplace and see if there's anything that is built for distance learning that you might be able to migrate to or add, or new features you could turn on that are going to help you deal with this, pandemic, hybrid coming back, and then always still trying to keep kids connected at home. One other important thing I just want to call about those Google updates is they actually invested pretty heavily in accessibility. And we've called that out on the show many times. Those who are, maybe hard of hearing or, some sort of vision loss and other sort of issues, they're struggling at home, right? They were struggling before and they're struggling at home now. So the devices that people have in their hands, the software that people use, it's really important that we see this accessibility. And Google's announced some significant accessibility features that they've added to their suite. So just want to call that out. I'm sure a lot of Google fans and folks in the Google ecosystem out there, but it's time to make sure you take a look and deploy those new tools. So finally, I just want to call out, Kevin, we are set to do another Q panel. And if anybody saw the Q Fall series, we did an EdTech and Politics, a version of this show on Q with Pam and some other Washington insiders. Then we did a superintendent's panel. We're going to do the same thing, except it's going to be today's topics. So we're really looking forward to that. You want to mark your calendars. That's going to be on March 20th, that Saturday, March 20th. And we'll be doing a session like this with a larger group. And we'll also be doing a superintendent's panel to get some feedback from what's on the ground. So with that, Kevin, anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I just, there's a lot of folks who are watching this every week, but just so you know, the acronym Computer Using Educators is the group. And Tim, are we going to have some kind of a link so people can familiarize themselves with Q? And then it's part of their conferencing activity. We're going to be doing the special session for them, and it'll just be added info. I mean, it's always sort of the latest intel on what's going on. You almost can't get enough of it. So really appreciate that announcement, Tim.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, one interesting change to Q this year is they do have an admin specific track. In the past, there were just certain events that were appropriate for admins, and now there's an entire track for admins. So if you haven't registered, please go ahead and do so. You'll be able to watch our sessions, and we really appreciate everybody supporting this show. We just want to call out the fact that we're about at 500 subscribers on our YouTube channel. That's very important to us, and frankly, our goal is 1,000. So if you can help spread the word, we would really appreciate the help, and we really thank everybody for tuning in each week. So Kevin, thanks so much, and we'll look forward to catching you next week for more news.
Great to see you. Yeah. So thanks again for joining us for another week of this broadcast.
And I just want to take a moment to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and share this out over social media. Again, you're our marketing team. I'll also finish by saying, if you have some questions, please send them our way. We'd be happy to address them on a future broadcast. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll talk soon.